Welcome to the Benefits Boost,
where we bring game-changing ideas to you,
the people shaping the future of benefits.
Let's jump in.
Here we go. We're on the line with Mike Stone, founder of Nexus Medicine. Vlad and Kate here as well. Hi.
Hello.
We're so excited to have you on, Mike. I just want to kind of cue this up with saying that you're my doctor. I call you my longevity doctor. We can dig into that in a second. You're one of the few people actually in this field who looks at how to help people avoid disease before they get it, increase their health span, possibly increase their lifespan. I'm probably mislabeling some of what you think about what you do, which is totally fair. And I want to get into that in just a second. But this is ultimately why I started working with you, Mike. And we've been working together now for like 3 or 4 months or 5. I mean, it's been a while.
Wow, that hurts, Vlad. I think we've been working together for almost a year this summer.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure.
That's okay. If it's like 3 months in your mind, that just means time flies.
When you're having fun, it really goes by fast.
I was going to say, I thought you guys started at least last summer, right?
You must be right. But I don't think it's been a year. I think it's maybe been
not a year
like
yet.
9 months. Okay.
Yeah. But that actually, wow, that's crazy because I still feel like we're digging into understanding some of like how my body works and stuff like that. So it's, I'm still learning a ton, which is saying a lot about this process. But the reason why I really wanted to bring you on, besides getting Kate a free visit with Mike,
score,
is because I think that there's a really fascinating conversation happening right now. It's been happening, but it's certainly accelerated over the last few years about interventions for humans that happen before disease strikes. And I think it's been something that the benefits community has actually been really passionate about for decades with well-being programs and trying to push that. But it's really entered the popular culture in a whole new way where the Reddit bros are pushing their creatine, the collagen queens are out there talking about collagen supplements. There's just an incredible movement towards finding interventions, help people live longer and help them maintain a higher, I guess we call it health span. And the reality is most people don't know what they're talking about, and Mike actually does. And so what Kate and I are hoping is that from this conversation, the benefits industry, who controls like well over $1 trillion of spend per year, can think about how to allocate funding towards, and the conversation towards interventions that really move the needle on kind of where Mike sees things going. Because I think you're probably the best or one of the best to understand that. So Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited for this. It's going to be fun.
I'm very excited too. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, you really have been.
Yeah.
You've been talking about this for like
I know.
a few weeks.
I've been really looking forward. Well, Vlad, you've talked about Mike so much. So I'm like, okay, I'm so excited to finally meet Mike.
We could just kick Vlad out and you and I can do this.
Yeah, we could.
Turn this into a one-on-one visit. This podcast is sponsored by, Airbo. We make benefits education simple and engaging and free. We really believe that everyone should have access to wonderful benefits education so that your employees have all the resources they need to thrive using your programs. And let's be honest, so that you don't get all that employee noise. You can sign up for our free AI tool, free microsite, and lots of other great stuff at airbo.com/free. Mike, I guess when we were prepping for this conversation, we got into the side discussion of like defining who you are versus not. And I know this is something you've thought deeply about. And I know you don't care, but I actually would love for people to understand who they're hearing. So if you could give us like a little bit about your career track of where you went to school, including like the fancy names so people understand that it's as good as it gets, your emergency room time, and kind of how you exited that and got into the space that you're in today. I think it would just really help people contextualize your perspective.
Happy to do it. I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in New Jersey and went to I'll give a little more personal context too. So my mother was a teacher for her entire career. My father was a private practice urologist for his whole career. So a son of a teacher and a doctor, and not surprisingly, I ended up going into medical education as a big part of what my career was for years. I went to Brown for undergrad and barely squeaked out of there with a bachelor's of science in biology. And I really mean that. I was kind of almost on the 5-year track to graduate point was definitely living my best life, but maybe not my best academic life while I was there. I remember applying to medical school a year late. I worked for Brown University for a year after I graduated, set up their multimedia lab and did computer tech support, which if I'd only known was like the best skills preparing me for a life of Zoom and digital media and everything else in the long run. But I did that while studying to take my MCATs, applied to med school a year late with that gap year in between college and med school. And I think I applied to like 12 med schools and I got into 3. And I didn't get interviews at any of like the big name schools like the Harvard. I think must have had a chuckle and just thrown my application in the trash. And I ended up with a couple of good schools on the list though. And I went to NYU for med school, which was really a joy to come back to New York. My brother was at NYU Law at the same time. And it was really fun to like live in the same city. And New York's a great place when you're in your 20s and you're playing in a band and running around learning medicine and having fun. And then I went out to the Highland Hospital, which is now Alameda County Medical Center or Alameda Health System emergency medicine program in Oakland, California. And we were affiliated with UCSF before UCSF had their own emergency medicine residency. So it was a really kind of best of both worlds place to train in emergency. You had all of the urban trauma strife and challenges of being in the trauma center for Oakland. And then you had all of the sort of quaternary care, advancements in medicine that come from a place like UCSF. So it was a really amazing place to train. And then from there, went on kind of a grand tour of the country as an academic emergency physician. So I worked shifts in the ER. I taught residents and medical students and nurses and physician assistants and nurse practitioners. I had my own couple of little niches within emergency medicine that I taught. Also did a fair amount of moonlighting and just working in community hospitals. Anything from like only doctor in the county in a tiny critical access hospital up on the California-Oregon border, all the way to like Central Valley, California, really underserved population that
so you're like really seeing it.
I've
really
seen
in there.
Yeah, I mean, and then ultimately found my way. Worked at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. Worked back in Oakland for a bit, and then found my way to Brigham and Women's Hospital and was a associate professor of emergency medicine at Harvard Med School, which was hysterical because like I didn't even get an interview to go there as a student, but apparently like I'm okay to teach there. I feel like I really got a deep understanding of what emergency care looks like in our country. Right. Everywhere from, the shining halls of Harvard to, middle of nowhere, fly a prop jet in to be the only doctor in the county for 13 hours and then, sleep it off and go back.
And did you meet Dan when you were teaching at Harvard? Dan Dworkin,
I met Dan at Harvard. He was a resident physician when I was an instructor in emergency medicine there.
Is Dan how you two got connected?
Yeah. So
okay. Yes. How did you guys get connected?
So Dan,
okay,
for those that don't know, Dan Dworkis is our chief medical officer at Airbo, and he runs like our research. We're actually launching we have launched a consulting practice within Airbo that's centered around Dan, where he's doing projects like the one that I spoke about earlier with the employer, where we're studying why their
employees are not getting their annual checkups.
Yeah. So Dan's like leading that research. So we really like to have him, but also extra lucky that when I was like, Dan, like, will you become one of these longevity doctors so you can like make sure we don't die too soon? He was like, yeah, I mean, like way better to go talk to Mike than have me do it. He did look into it initially and then decided that he's like, you should really meet Mike.
This makes also like so much more sense now because I'm like, oh, Dan, as you were saying your story, I'm like, this sounds a lot like Dan. Like Dan has had some interesting stuff too. And now I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. It like clicked.
Yeah.
Okay.
We share some, we've traveled some of the same roads, me and Dan.
Gotcha.
So here you are in Boston.
So I'm in Boston. I've been there for 5 years. I kind of come to this crossroads of, what am I doing with my career over the next, 15, 20, 25 years? And I had a real crossroads where on one hand, I had an offer to be the chairman at one of the largest trauma centers in the country. And on the other hand, I had a buddy of mine from training back in Oakland who had remained a really close friend who said, hey, one of our docs in this practice in Portland, Oregon is retiring. And we don't really, we got a stack of like 40 people who just want to hear if we have an opening, but like, we know you. And do you want to come out and look at that? And my wife and we went and looked at both places. And long story short, came out to Portland, left academic medicine, and really just dug into spending time with my wife and kids and spending time outdoors and doing the things that I love to do and working in the emergency emergency department out here. It was a great group. Really enjoyed working at the in the practice I was in here in Portland for about another 5 years. And then right before COVID, I just had this epiphany that I didn't want to do this anymore. There's a lot behind why I didn't want to do it anymore. That's a different podcast altogether. But then COVID happened, and I felt like it would be really lousy of me to just leave the ER and leave everybody to handle the pandemic. So I worked for another year in April of 2021. So, next month will be 4 years since I've been in the emergency department as a practitioner. But the crux of that transition for me was I'm generally a pretty humble person. This is just factual. I was a really good ER doc. I was always, seeing high numbers of patients, low numbers of complications. I feel like my patients liked me. I cared about them. It was a good experience for them. And yet I felt like I was just kind of managing this revolving door of illness where, let's say the average emergency, I calculated this maybe a year after I left practice in the ER. I think I took care of about 35,000 people over the course of 20 years in the emergency department. And rough numbers, I'd say I really made a meaningful impact on saving a life in a way that not any other ER doctor could do, but just like, it was a good thing I was there probably like 5 times in 35,000 visits. And then another 1,000 to 2,000 of feeling like that was really like valuable care that I provided, right? Like somebody had a dislocated shoulder and I put it back in place, right? Or someone had, a serious illness that got diagnosed quickly in the ER and managed, and they had a better outcome than they would have had they been somewhere else or delayed their care. But the amount of unmanaged chronic illness that leads to visits in the emergency department where, if you come into the emergency department, I'll just use this example. You have, let's say, metabolic syndrome. You're obese, you have high blood pressure, maybe you've got some insulin resistance and high glucose and like prediabetes, and you have a foot infection. I can prescribe you antibiotics for your foot infection. But when you go home, you're still going to have obesity and high blood pressure and prediabetes or diabetes. And it's just going to be a matter of time until something else pops up that needs to be managed. I wanted to move away from that and towards really getting down to helping people live their best lives today and stay healthy, as opposed to waiting until they get sick and then managing them really well in the system that we have in the US. This may be like a hot take on a podcast for benefits managers, but the Western healthcare system is tremendously well positioned and aligned and incentivized to take care of sick people. Right? I mean,
not
like
a hot
it's
take.
I was
This is the whole conversation.
It is not aligned to take care to keep people well. It has its role, right? If I go out on my run this afternoon and somebody in a Darth Vader suit with on a unicycle, because that's like a Portland thing, like clips me and I fall down and break my arm, like I want to go to a Western orthopedic surgeon and get my arm fixed, right? But if I want to have the strength and coordination and balance and agility to sidestep the Darth Vader on the unicycle when I'm, say, 70 years old, nobody in the Western healthcare is working on that. Right. So how do we avoid the injury? How do we avoid the heart attack by diagnosing the plaque in the coronary arteries earlier before it leads to a heart attack? How do we get people off of their blood pressure medicines instead of on escalating doses of additional blood pressure medicines? Like, it's really a 180 flip in my approach to healthcare after leaving emergency medicine and kind of embarking on this new journey.
So this is what blows my mind, by the way, that statement that he just made, that there's nobody, like the fact that that's not
a thing.
Because I would have thought it would be, I already knew PCPs were, like, no offense, practically useless.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that they have to know and focus on. And it's like,
Check boxes.
Exactly. It's check boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely not a hot take, Mike. That is exactly
well, it's good to hear
what's
that people
happening.
know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think every single person listening to this in our space is going to be like, yep, that's accurate.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at the PCPs, and sorry, Kate, I know I can feel a question coming, but those, I just want to throw some love to to any of the physicians who are actually working in this system. I left the system. I'm working in my own system. I don't work in an insurance-based model, and that limits the people who have access to me. And I recognize that when you're working in an insurance incentivized model as a PCP, you have to see, let's say, 25 patients a day. It could be more, it could be less. You've got 15 minutes to talk to somebody, and you have to check the right boxes to get that visit reimbursed, and you need to chart appropriately to make sure that you're not going to be denied for that visit. And it's just a really challenge. Like, I don't know how anyone could be a really quote unquote good PCP in that kind of model. You need more time with people. We're complex biological, spiritual, emotional organisms. We're not just, what's your blood pressure, what's your blood glucose, here's a pill, here's what you should, eat less, move more, see you next year. Like that, it's just not a model that's built for success. It's kind of doomed from the start.
Yeah, and they're just basically stuck between a rock and a hard place in a lot of cases.
I know a lot of weird people who went into medicine. Like, we're a weird bunch. I don't know anybody who went into medicine who didn't actually genuinely want to help people as their career, right? I mean, people went in with all the right reasons, and then the incentives are so misaligned that it's very difficult to actually live that truth and practice as a PCP or a pediatrician or, any number of other specialties.
I'm curious, so you left, how did you transition into Nexus? Can you walk through that?
Yeah, for sure. A simplification to say I just left the ER and hung up a shingle. It's not how it went. I had done I've always had an entrepreneurial mindset. I've started a few nonprofit organizations around medical education, a couple of for-profit ventures. I worked for a medical device company for about a year and a half while working in the emergency department before I made this transition. That makes a handheld ultrasound device really cool. Plugs into your phone or your iPad and becoming a bigger thing in the medical space. So I had a little bit of a sense of, I'll probably figure something out. I had that little bit of confidence that something would work out, even if it wasn't what I had in mind. And that's kind of exactly what happened. I started a practice locally. So started up Nexus, started doing a combination of athletic and health optimization and performance for folks and consultations. And then was also doing some mental health work with ketamine treatment for depression, anxiety, PTSD. It just kind of naturally evolved. I mean, I had been working while I was in that last year in the ER, I was working for a company called Wild Health, where I still work, which does telemedicine, preventative, personalized care. I was one of the early team members there and helped build up their training program for doctors and coaches to learn how to practice this kind of medicine. So that was already something I had been doing. And then it was just, I wanted to build my own thing exactly the way I wanted. Nexus kind of became its own entity and its own version of what I think healthcare should look like. Not throwing even an ounce of shade at Wild Health. I still work there. They're a great bunch of people. They have a great practice. You just have more flexibility when it's your own referral only, really small, deeply relational practice. So it was a slow evolution. I think I worked 12 shifts a month as a partner in the emergency department. And then all of a sudden I was 8, and then it was 6. And then I think when I got down to 4, I realized, you're just holding on to this identity as an ER doc. And are you really serving your partners well? And I'd already gone part-time, but it just seemed like I was going through the motions of doing it because I was afraid of what was my life going to be when I wasn't an ER doc anymore. And then I just cut the cord and so to speak, and went off on my own.
Here we are.
I know.
And here we are.
Yeah. Here we are. That's cool. You said something interesting about how you think people should be treated. And I said something along the lines of PCPs are useless. After having said, we're working with a company to increase PCP visits, which sort of just makes the point that this whole system is full of contradictions, and different populations of humans in America have access to different systems in reality. I'm very lucky to have access to you, right? This is an absolute privilege and absolute luxury to me that I can do this. And it's one of the reasons why I do what I do, is to be able to do things like this. I'm just really curious, from your perspective, first of all, do you think visiting a PCP for the average person actually matters? Let's start there.
It depends on what the alternative is. If the alternative is a strong, really loving and genuine, authentic relationship with another healthcare provider who does a number of other things for you, then stop seeing your PCP. If the alternative is I don't go to the doctor, there are things that you would want to detect earlier that would lead to a higher chance of having a better outcome. right? So like the U.S. Preventative Task Force guidelines around colon cancer screening and prostate cancer screening and breast cancer and cervical cancer screening and skin cancer screening, those are all phenomenal guidelines. We should be following those guidelines for early detection of multiple different types of cancer so that we can avoid detecting cancer in its late stages, right? If you're not checking your blood pressure, you want to know if you have high blood pressure. It's a significant risk for heart disease and stroke and other, kidney failure and other issues down the line. So if that's your only interface with the healthcare system, yes, you should see a PCP because you'll at least get screened for high cholesterol. You'll get screened for prediabetes or insulin resistance. You'll get screened for high blood pressure. You'll get screened for cancer. Those are, I think, worthwhile things to be doing on a health maintenance standpoint.
Okay.
Is there anything that you would say to a person going to a PCP to definitely ask their PCP during that visit, kind of based on everything that you've gone through with starting Nexus in the past few years?
I mean, I think the challenge is that the PCP is probably not equipped to be able to do that deep dive with them around their health.
Yeah.
So if there's something that's bothering them from a physical standpoint, yes, that's something you should bring up. Am I doing everything I should be doing from a preventative healthcare standpoint to stay well? That's probably the question I would advise people to ask. But at the end of the day, when you mentioned health span and lifespan earlier, there's only a handful of things that have actually been shown to extend human lifespan. And none of them will come as much of a surprise, I think, for most people. It's physical activity, nutrition, sleep, emotional, spiritual health, which I lump kind of stress resiliency and stress management into that bucket, and community. And which one of those things is your PCP going to really dive deeply with you on? I can't think of any of them. Right. The advice you tend to get from a PCP is, yes, you should move more. Or for nutrition, if someone's overweight, you should eat less. That's not necessarily the right strategy for them to eat less, by the way, but that's what they say. And that's not a fault of the PCPs. I think I had less than an hour of nutrition education as a medical student. It's just not something that's focused on an allopathic.
Less than an hour of nutritional education as a medical student.
In 4 years of medical school.
In 4 years of medical school.
Yeah.
Wow.
And 0 on a balance of intensity training or resistance training or moderate intensity exercise, cardiovascular conditioning. 0. None.
That blows my mind.
So the people you're going in, most Americans are going in to speak about typically weight management, which is typically driven primarily by nutrition and exercise. I've had almost no training on how to actually improve those two variables.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, I think that most primary care practices interface in some way with a nutritionist. So at least there's some trained guidance on that. I don't know of any brick and mortar off the shelf PCP practices that have trainers, folks to actually craft an exercise program that fits the needs of the person they're speaking with. I think that's really outside of the scope. Sleep, they tend to say, screening for obstructive sleep apnea is pretty common in Western medicine, but in terms of actually working to optimize sleep architecture and make sure that people are getting restorative, deep or slow wave and REM sleep, not a focus. Spiritual, emotional, mental health, they dabble around the edges. Are you stressed? Maybe here's a mindfulness app or something like that, very sort of cursory. And then community. I mean, there are practices out there that do group work, but it's not a focus of, again, you're going from what's the ideal look like to me. It's the healthcare should be preventative. It should be personalized. It should be predictive. We have a lot of data we can actually utilize these days to look at what's happening and identify a problem early. And it should be participatory. The person needs to be engaged in their own health. People ask me all sorts of questions all the time, but one of the questions I get is what do you think about Ozempic? And what do you think about Mounjaro, right? So these GLP-1 agonists and GLP/GIP, and there's a new generation coming out now. And I think it depends, which is my answer to almost any question that someone asks me. If somebody asks me, is smoking good for my health? I'll say no. But most questions I get, my answer is it depends. Because if you're using one of those medications, it depends on what's the reason that you're using it. Are you using it to lose weight? Are you using it to control diabetes, to lower your cardiovascular risk, to prevent inflammation or reduce inflammation or Alzheimer's disease risk? Different levels of evidence to support each one of those indications. And are you using it as a magic pill and you plan on eating the same ultra high processed food foods and living a sedentary lifestyle and being on your phone first thing in the morning and stressed out all day, if you're doing that, you're going to get very limited results out of using one of those medications. It needs to be participatory. If you're using a medication like that and you have an indication for it and it's coupled with behavior change and actually increasing your engagement on the 5 things we talked about that extend human lifespan, I think it can be a great adjunct for someone, right? So if it's not participatory, this is of all the things that annoy me about the traditional healthcare system in the US, I think the one that annoys me the most is this sort of paternalistic, dogmatic approach to taking care of another human being, where I know what's right for you, Vlad, so this is what you need to do. And if you don't do it, that's your fault and you've somehow failed in your own healthcare. And also, you don't have the agency to know what's right for you. And you don't have the agency to say, I'm going to change this, that, and the other. I'm going to give you a pill for this, and that's your treatment, right? And I think until you have a true partnership with someone where the person you're working with, from my perspective, is as engaged or more engaged in their health than you are, you're always going to come up short. And this is, and that's a whole other conversation, is how do you create that openness, right? We have a lot of substance abuse issues in our country. I have substance use issues in my own family. And like, if someone's not ready to engage into the process of recovery, whatever that looks like for them, you're not really going to get very far. And it's the same thing on the health side of things. If someone's not really interested in doing the work and participating, there's only so much that you can really get done for someone's health in that context. I'll get off my soapbox.
Kate, this is like one of the things that I'm really happy we came across, because right now in the benefits industry, there is this big pullback from having overinvested in benefit programs over the last like 5 years, right?
Yep.
This post-pandemic benefits big bang kind of that's happened. I've generally said that there are too many things. It's fragmented from a user journey perspective. But I think what this makes the point of, and I think this is really important, which is like, I think there's an underlying question, which is, has benefits actually overstepped as a function? And are they doing too much for their employees? Are they installing too many opportunities? Do we need a specialized vendor for menopause? Is that really necessary? And I think, Mike, one of the points that you're kind of making here, which I really agree with, is that if a company is not actually adding those vendors for health coaching, for these additional interventions, for most people, except maybe the top like 3% of maybe people who can like afford it, you're just not going to get it. You're not going to get that support anywhere else. A company that's offering these things is actually providing something that's differentiated and, when implemented correctly, can be really impactful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I think one of the biggest challenges, and the term that keeps popping in my head as you were talking, Mike, was healthcare consumerism. Like, people just aren't taught how to navigate the healthcare system, or how to be like a steward of their own health kind of within it, or how to take advantage of all of these programs that you're talking about.
Though. It's like empowered. They're disempowered. I think Mike's point is like, you feel disempowered when you're trying to engage in the system. You can't teach.
I don't know. I feel like yes, I would say disempowered is a good word to use as well, but it's also a really complex system to navigate. And most people, like a majority of the people, are not in the benefits and healthcare space. So we're leaving them to their own devices to navigate the current system. I think a lot of times companies are implementing programs that help with the claims that they're seeing, because it's like a way to help an employee navigate, let's say, diabetes, for example, as like a solution. I'm not saying it's like, it is like a difficult system to navigate. And I think companies are trying to implement things that make it easier, and it's come out as these benefits, these like point solutions.
I think there's like 2 issues there. One is like getting to the right thing, assuming you can find it. And the second thing is like, does that thing even exist to find? And I think the concerning thing to me about this narrative, it's not there to find. It doesn't exist. Navigating people to go see the PCP as a way of expecting obesity to decrease is like silly. It's actually just like probably a dumb intervention. There's this illusion that if we just get people to the doctor, that somehow like magic happens. I just don't think it's reality. I think that's like not true. It's fundamentally untrue. The thing just doesn't actually exist. It's not there.
I just got to pipe in here. How many times? So Vlad and Kate, personal question. Vlad, you don't get to include, although you can if you want to tease me, any of our visits. But how many times have you left a physician or nurse practitioner or physician assistant visit for your own health or accompanying someone you love where you feel like, wow, we really got everything we wanted out of that? Like that really hit the spot. And I ask that because I've asked this in a lot of rooms over a lot of years. And I think to your point, Vlad, of, there is this assumed unexamined belief that if you get people to the doctor, things will change. And I think if you look at the reality of the experience and not the belief, how many people leave their doctor's office like fist pumping? That was great. I got exactly what I needed. A lot of people leave and go, they didn't listen. I don't feel like anything happened. I'm getting shuttled to this other person because this person doesn't think they can handle it. And then they go to the other person who sends them back to the first person. There's a lot of inefficiency and unsatisfaction on the part of a consumer, even if they get to the doctor.
I mean, yeah, I personally have definitely experienced that. And I've had family members that have been very sick, and I've been in the room with them, like multiple people in the room with them. It's been a struggle to get the information we need.
That's understating. I remember the calls afterwards.
Yeah. It was multiple people asking questions and trying to figure out paths forward. And it was there. I would say most of the times we'd leave defeated. There were some times you'd leave happy, but a lot of times you would leave with more questions than answers.
Yeah, I'm sorry you and your family had to go through that, but I can't say I'm even remotely surprised. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
everybody has.
This is a lot of what they don't tell you when you go to med school is you're going to be everybody's doctor in the family afterwards. It's a gift, honestly. I mean, I don't see it as a hassle. I like it when people call and ask, hey, I'm going through this, or my loved one's going through this, and we can't understand anything about what they're telling us. Just being able to kind of translate. I've been through the healthcare system multiple times with multiple family members, and I don't know how many times I've told my wife, like, I don't know how people who don't have a medical background navigate this system. It's built to be confusing. And I'm not saying that from like a conspiracy theory standpoint. I don't think anybody's trying to harm patients.
Just sitting in Portland, man. Just taking out the conspiracy
riding my unicycle.
theories.
No, I mean, I think it's a byproduct of the system and the incentives in the system. I don't think it's an intentional. It's built for intentional harm, but it isn't built to communicate. It isn't. My mother saw a provider a couple of years ago, and I just remember this one comment that she left, and I said, "Oh, how was your visit with blah blah blah?" And she said, "Her ponytail is amazing." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, she looked at the screen and was typing the whole time, and all I got to see was her ponytail." And that's such a common experience, not exactly in those words, but a common experience in the healthcare system. The doctors are incentivized to finish their charting for reimbursement purposes. I will say AI is making a big impact there. There are a lot of HIPAA compliant transcription services that are now up and running in major hospital systems and in small clinics, where if I had wanted to, we could do this entire podcast and I would have a full medical note of our visit afterwards in a completely encrypted, secure way that allows you to like connect one-on-one and not be typing. So I think that part's starting to get a little bit better. But
I love hearing that.
Oh, actually, one of my best friends, Prashant Samant, he's the CEO of Aikido Labs. This is a huge area that they're pushing on. They actually literally bought a couple of health systems, and or I actually don't know what the structure was exactly, but essentially like they became a provider. They're like really like actually working on tooling to push as much of this like work that doesn't add value to the patient to an AI doctor. And they're not the only ones. There's a bunch of companies right now that are being funded that are kind of all in a race with each other that I'm sure you've heard of, that are building proprietary LLMs and then combining that with interventions from a doctor to actually review the care plan or like whatever for like really obvious stuff. Like, and Mike, I'll just say like blanket, like nothing's off limits when it comes to like our work together. Like I want to make it as public as possible, but I travel a lot. And one of the things that happens when I travel a lot is I get sinus infections, and I am an expert at gaming the healthcare system to give me antibiotics when I want them. I know what to say. I said a very similar set of things to Mike and Trey, who's my health coach, who partners with Mike, on a text chain. Because they're like, hey, this is a group we're going to create for you on iMessage. And you just text us when you have a question right there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I texted it and I was like, hey, describe my situation. I was like, typically I would just do antibiotics. Can you just give me antibiotics? I have a meeting in 1 week. I absolutely cannot miss. It's critical I make it. I got this blurb from Mike that was like about, this much of a bubble. And it was like, actually, what you should do is do the sinus rinse, and gave me like a set of things to do with one small tweak relative to what I'd heard before, which is like more sinus rinsing than I'd heard before, whatever. So I would have normally, again, just gone on to game my healthcare provider because I've tried those tactics. They hadn't worked for me that one time. With Mike and Trey, I'm like, well, Mike's the best. He wants what's best for me because we built all this trust. And I was like, okay, I'll do it as an experiment. And sure enough, my sinus infection went away in time for the meeting. And I actually now just travel with that nasal natty pot kind of thing to kind of take preventive action. And I actually haven't gotten one since. The reason I told that story is that it hits on a couple things. One is it speaks to the trust that I built with my provider. The advice is not that different than I would have gotten from another provider. I just trust that Mike and Trey like really want what's best for me, and they're in a text thread with me, and they're going to reply ASAP, and they always do, unless they're climbing a mountain. But they told me ahead of time they were doing that. And then the second thing is that response could have been generated by AI. It was like very like do this. It's like copy and paste practically, which I hope it was because that would be annoying to type out. So there's like this thing happening with us figuring out in this industry where the human sits versus where AI sits, and like what is valuable. And what we're figuring out at Airbo is that our like the superpower of customer success in our team is that the human to human interface and building trust and like making sure that they know that we're going to look out what's best for them and make sure they're getting the best possible answer. But we don't need to be the ones who are like writing the email or uploading an eligibility file or like whatever. Like all that needs to be automated and being driven by AI tooling. So really pushing towards that human layer. And so like I kind of hope that that's what we're going to see in the PCP space, is that AI frees up a bunch of room for that doctor to actually do the job that they wanted to do when they got into that industry.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I almost certainly used AI in some fashion to text that to you. One of my standard workflows is I'll say, create a message to my patient with these recommendations. It just formats it nicely, and it's got a little more meat around the bones for each one of those recommendations. Like, here's a link to this thing or whatever, right? That I think is a huge value add to just give people a richer experience, but not, hey, ChatGPT, how do you treat a sinus infection? Like that scares me if that's how we're using it right now. Maybe it is good enough. I don't want to outsource my caring for people and recommendations to AI yet. Maybe someday.
No, I just want to make clear that it's a really bad idea to do that, because ChatGPT, like we know from the research in ChatGPT and how it handles medical advice, that it doesn't ask enough questions to provide an accurate recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes just plain makes mistakes. I played with it a bunch when it first came out and just gave it scenarios just to kind of see. And yeah, I mean, I've said it before, we're really infinitely complex organisms. There are multiple things that we don't even understand. Like, we don't have the information to feed to an LLM around so much of how we work, right? I mean, even just the field of like epigenetics and, transgenerational inheritance and trauma, mental health issues, like we don't have enough of an understanding from a scientific perspective to train an LLM on how to manage it. So definitely not going to let AI take care of my own health. I would let it augment my own health from my provider. And I think that's really useful. And then I just have to circle back to thank you for trusting us. And that is the cornerstone of what AI will never do, and what is significantly missing from most people's interaction in healthcare. It's a deeply relational practice. Like, what if your healthcare team genuinely cared about you as a human being so clearly that you felt it? In which case, they might tell you to do something that isn't your first choice, but you go, okay, I'll give it a shot, right? And, maybe it'll work out and you saved yourself the antibiotics and the stomach upset and the diarrhea and all the stuff that can come with it because you said, okay, I trust these guys, I'll give it a shot, right? Worst thing that happens is you don't get better and then we write you for some antibiotics, right? But, the gaming of the healthcare system is real, and all you have to do is walk into urgent care and tell them that you've had bloody nasal discharge and green stuff coming out of your nose, and it's been 2 weeks, and you've had fevers, even though maybe it's been 2 days and you just have a business trip and you don't want to take chances. They don't know how to verify that. You said the right things, they're going to write you for some antibiotics, right? So I don't encourage that behavior, just for the record, for listeners. If you don't have that core level of trust, you're left in this situation where you feel like you need to look out for yourself, and not in a way of having, sort of the reverse of what you were talking about, Kate, with this helplessness. I think about like healthcare sovereignty, really knowing what's going on. Like nothing gives me greater pleasure than like someone I've worked with for a few years who feels like, I've got this. Thank you. Is it okay if I fire you? And, I kind of like hit you up when I need you. And it's because they've really taken control over their own health. They're their own best advocate now. How do you get to that? That has to start from a foundation of like real trust and understanding. And I don't know where that there are doctors out there who aren't me who do that, but the bar is pretty low. They're hard to find. Yeah, nobody's building AI for that.
I just wish we could do that for everybody, like everybody has that doctor, that community.
This kind of gets to, I guess, this like community piece. It kind of makes me think of Reddit. Right. And, the reason I started working with Mike is because I found myself trying to figure out my own supplements. And I was actually working with a nutritionist, and every time I said something, the answer was, here's another supplement. And it started like really weirding me out that I was popping like 30 pills a day. I remember when I sent that supplement list over to Mike, he was like, yeah, we got to get your blood work back, but it's very unlikely that you need this many things.
Wow.
It's very unlikely. And if you look at the conversation that's happening right now on like Reddit and popular media around longevity, again, like Brian Johnson, Blueprint Health has been, for better or worse, at the forefront of this thing. That's like a huge piece of it. It's like somehow diet and exercise and eating whole foods gets kind of like a bit glossed over in this conversation a lot of times. But it's very much like, are you taking, list off some things that are probably not bad to take. Magnesium, I took it last night because I need help sleeping sometimes. Or like 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C daily, probably not necessary on most days. Maybe it is. Vitamin D, turns out have a deficiency, need that. But then there's like 15 other things that are pill bottles in my drawer right now that I don't understand what they do or why I was really taking them. That never made me feel any different, but I was told to take. And so if you're interested in this area, you're generally self-diagnosing and self-prescribing right now, picking and choosing who to listen to on the basis of probably their media presence. Mike, you don't know John, but John's our head of product. And John, Dan, and I are like old friends, and we're on a text thread together. Literally, I think yesterday, John was like, or maybe 2 days ago, he was like, hey, like I figured out that I need 0.75 something of creatine versus 0.5 or maybe 50 milligrams of creatine versus 750, something with the dosage that was an increase of 50% dosage. And I read the thread and I was like, shoot, am I underdosing creatine? Like, I don't know. And the whole point is like, the reason I started working with Mike is because we have to abstract that up somehow. No. I don't think it's possible for me to actually understand what the right answer is, but like finding somebody like Mike is a way to get to the answer, probably like way more reliably and not fall into a Reddit hole. Yeah, Mike, I'm just kind of curious what your opinions on.
God, there's so much there. I mean, you just like beautifully outlined the fear and scarcity mindset that drives people to purchase things, period. Right? Like if I had this in my life, I'd be happy. This is how marketing works. Oh, he's taking 75 or 7.5 grams of creatine and I'm only taking 5 grams. Like, am I missing out here? Could I be like significantly more jacked and healthy and amazing if I just did that? Yeah. Well, you're getting there, but it's not going to be 2.5 more grams of creatine a day that does it for you. It's a hard thing for a lot of people who are interested in this. I don't know what to call it, longevity, biohacking, self-optimization kind of process is, what am I missing here? What could I be doing or what should I be doing that's going to really move the needle and make me, hit this goal or live this long or be this healthy? No, shade thrown at Blueprint or anybody else who's doing whatever they do. People are going to find the right fits for them. And, somebody might want to get all their advice from Andrew Huberman and somebody else might want to go.
I can't believe Huberman hasn't come up once yet. That's got to be a world record.
Somebody can go see somebody who's actually ever taken care of a real patient in their life instead of Andrew. Not everything he says is incorrect, but would I go to the postman to fix my car? No, I'd go to the mechanic to fix my car. Probably a better analogy, would I go to the auto body guy to fix my car? Not the body of it, but the engine. No. And Andrew Huberman is a PhD. He's a brilliant person, knows a lot about, retinal physiology and biology, but doesn't actually take care of people. So why would you do something to take care of yourself.
I had no idea that he didn't.
But what?
Yeah,
But
he's
what
not
if
a
he
medical
has
doctor. He's a PhD. He has a doctorate in, and I think ophthalmology is his general field, but it doesn't have anything to do with whether you should cold plunge, right? Like that's.
Mike, he works at Stanford. He works at Stanford.
Yes, he's got the name, and you know what? Also, to use Huberman as a bridge here, sells his own supplements. So, like, yes, you went to a nutritionist. I bet that nutritionist is like, here's my white labeled supplements that I can sell you that you need to be taking. I don't sell my own supplements.
Where you should order it.
Yeah, I don't sell my own supplements for exactly that reason. I don't think it's possible to do it, and even if you're the best intentioned, it just creeps in the specter of inauthenticity and ethical breaches for you to say, hey, Vlad, I really think you need to take this vitamin D. And by the way, it's like Mike Stone's vitamin D, and go buy it. Like, even if you did need it, it just feels dirty. I don't like that, so I don't do it. But the bottom line to all this, participatory. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can eat your In-N-Out burger and sit on the couch all day and nothing. Again, an In-N-Out burger is actually a really good burger, but like, you could eat an In-N-Out burger and sit on the couch all day and, eat ultra high processed foods and drink sugary beverages and take NMN and resveratrol and omega-3s and vitamin D and some useful, some kind of snake oil. You could take 30 different supplements. You're still going to be unhealthy because all of the supplementation is going to maybe get you, let's call it 5% of an incremental gain on your health. Where the real gain comes from is having good quality human connection and community, sleeping in a way that's restorative and valuable, moving your body in a strategic and effective way, eating foods that are going to support health, and managing your emotional, spiritual, and stress health. And if you do those things, you're 90+% there for as optimized as your epigenetics and genetics and the universe has in store for you. Yeah, that's going to be it. And then then you get into that last 5 to 10%, which some of the stuff is stuff I utilize all the time. I mean, omega-3 fatty acids are a great supplement for folks in many cases. Vitamin D. I live in the Pacific Northwest. My vitamin D levels are significantly low if I'm not supplementing. And it's an important thing for mood and immune system and other benefits. Creatine, all the way back to pre-recording, Kate, does have benefits on strength and muscle gain maintenance and on cognitive health. There are supplements that actually I think do add value. And then there's the wild west of NMN and follistatin gene therapy and stem cell infusions in the Caribbean and therapeutic plasma exchange and all the peptides. Some are good, some probably move the needle, some may not, some are dangerous, some are more, advantageous than dangerous. There's a whole area of regenerative medicine and biohacking that takes up 80% of the conversation and really represents 5 to 10% of the gains. And it's because it's fun to talk about that stuff and it's new and interesting, and it's not as fun to get yourself out of bed and go run or lift weights or, make a healthy meal. This is why I only work in a capacity where I have a health coach on my team, and this is where Trey fits in our practice and is a genius at what he does. It's how do you actually operationalize and execute on the quote unquote boring stuff like sleep, nutrition, physical activity, stress resiliency. How do we track your progress there? How do we make sure it's working for you? How do we keep it working when you're traveling, when somebody's sick in the house, when, there's other stressors and other things coming in and signals that can make it difficult. But at the end of the day, like navigating that whole field of supplements and others, it's chump change. It's like decimal dust for your health. But in our society, it's like, oh yeah, I'm definitely not doing as well as I could be because I'm not taking this neurocognitive supplement, or I'm not, going and mega dosing on creatine. Sorry, John, I haven't met you, but I'm already telling you you're wrong. but and like, could you get an extra gain from an extra 2.5 grams of creatine? If what you're interested in is like the 0.0000 level of gains, sure, maybe. I'd have to look at the evidence. I haven't seen anything to compel me to increase my creatine dosage for people. But, Vlad, you mentioned he sent you a study. From where? Peer-reviewed? Not peer-reviewed? How many patients? What were the outcomes? Like, who knows? Is it quite like...
I was embarrassed to forward it to you. I just was like, I can't...
You should definitely forward... Now I want to see it, so now you have to forward it to me. But, this is part of the problem with like our current pseudoscience / anti-science mindset that is, really growing in this country. You can find a study that supports anything. A lot of those studies have been retracted, and the authors have had to retire their positions because they just fabricated the data. A lot of them are done in really poorly controlled ways where you could get kind of any answer you wanted out of the data. Like, you need to know how to read the medical literature to know if it's something that's really validated and robust or if it's just somebody's idea.
Yeah.
Can you guys really quickly, just for the people listening, explain like how you got started? And because you went through, I remember watching you go through this because you did some blood tests at the beginning. Like, there's stuff, right, that you did. I just feel like it might be helpful context.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Even just high level, I think it'd be helpful to go through.
No, yeah, I think that's a good thing to go through. It actually cues up where I hope we can end this. What I hope people take away from this conversation is an idea of like, how do I direct my clients or my benefit program to hit these things that really make a difference for people? And Mike keeps coming back to 4 pillars very consistently, right? Which I could try to list off the top of my head. Community,
Nutrition,
physical activity,
spiritual and emotional.
Wait, did I already say sleep?
And I was gonna say there's actually 5. Sleep
there's
is the
5.
Yeah, I was
know
gonna
sleep.
say there's.
Oh, so spiritual is different from community. That's interesting because in my head it's kind of interwoven.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense that it's linked in your head, right? I mean, like, loneliness is a tremendous public health problem. Despite being as connected as we are, people are more and more alone these days. So
it's a
yes,
big thing
if you're lonely, you're not going to have good social emotional health. And this is how, I mean, there are 5 pillars, but they're all really deeply intertwined, right? I mean, if you take away sleep, see how well you eat and exercise if you're not sleeping, right? Yeah. I mean, they all influence each other.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've had 1 week of bad sleep the past like 5 days, and I haven't wanted to exercise at all. I'd like force myself the other day, and it's just like 1 week of it.
You mean a night?
Yeah, I've just had bad sleep. No, I've had a few nights of bad sleep.
Oh.
Yeah, or I was going through a few nights of bad sleep, and then I didn't want to eat well. I didn't want to exercise. I like righted it, but it's easy to happen.
Okay, so working with Mike, so it's kicked off. I said, do everything to me that you can. I'm in. They gave me a list of things. One really funny thing about this was like, I wanted to do all the, Mike, I'll let you actually go through like the details.
Yeah, I can go through the typical onboarding kind of stuff.
Yeah, from like the patient experience perspective, one thing that I thought was really interesting is I was like, I want to do all the testing. Let's do all the testing. You know, I want to do the full body MRI and the DNA test and blah, 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 blah. And let's get the phlebotomist in here and the 8 pace of aging test. We should probably redo that right away. They both like talked me off the cliff, and they're like, dude, if you do this, you will just be at the doctor the foreseeable future. You will not have a day when you're not doing something related to this, and you will hate your life and you will not want to keep doing this. So let's spread this out. Which, by the way, one of the reasons why it's been like 9 months, but it doesn't feel like it to me, is because rightfully we spread this out. But yeah, Mike, like, what does it look like for you guys typically?
Yeah, we have we're always evolving. I think the only constant is change. I think for us, our onboarding experience for folks probably looks significantly different than it did when you started with us 9 months ago, Vlad, but not like apples and oranges, but maybe like a green apple versus a red apple. The first thing we do is we hop on a call with Trey, myself, whoever's coming into the practice as a patient, and Stephanie, who's our care coordinator and office manager. And the 4 of us just spend some time getting to know each other. It's a doctor's visit unlike any doctor's visit most people have had. It's, tell us about your motivations for coming in, and this is how we practice, this is our approach. We do start to gather a little bit of information on that first call, but everything from like, how do you want to be contacted, and do you want us to be texting you? Do you want is email better? Do you want to schedule things through this person, or do you want to do it yourself? So like really just kind of getting that groundwork built. We do some testing right off the bat. So we do blood work, a pretty advanced biomarker panel. We do some DNA and epigenetic testing, and we send people a blood pressure cuff and a biometric scale that we then hook up into our system, so people can be measuring their blood pressure a couple of times a week, maybe once a week if they don't have issues, maybe more if they do. Getting on the scale, all that data is streaming into us, so people don't need to like take pictures of their readings or text us their information. We're just hooked into it. And then right after that meeting, people get that first meeting, even before testing has gone out, people get scheduled for their first call with Trey, and they have a health coaching call. It's an hour-long intake of motivational interviewing, goal setting, again, creating that therapeutic relationship. And then as soon as we start seeing any sort of data trickling in, we're meeting with folks and reviewing data as it's coming in, game planning next steps, and coming up with a team-based care model and some shared decision-making about what we want to do next. So it's unusual. We do a full-body MRI in some cases. We do CT coronary angiography to look at the coronary arteries for plaque. We do micronutrient testing and microbiome testing and body composition and VO2 max. And there's a million things that we can do. We don't do all of them for every person, and we don't have a prescriptive order in which we go through.
So this is an important point. I just want to interject here. You don't have a prescriptive order, and you don't do it all for everybody, which is something that really threw me off initially.
Oh, interesting. Why did it throw you off?
Well, because I came in with the belief that I needed every single test that I'd ever read about.
Okay, interesting. From hearing Mike speak, it seems like it's very tailored to the person. Hearing you say that makes total sense to me, but I guess you came in slightly different.
Yeah, Vlad just knew that I was friends with Dan. So he was like, okay, that's about the background Vlad had before we started working together. So, a little more.
A little more.
Why would I have the same plan for a, active, ultra-marathoning 32-year-old woman that I would for a relatively sedentary, overweight, pre-diabetic, stressed out male CEO who's 65 years old? It's insane to me that, there would be a cut and paste for everybody, right? And we are actually all very different. There's way more similarity than there is differences, but what's the area, do we need to focus on cardiovascular health for somebody who's got no family history and great blood pressure and they're under the age of 35? Not aggressively. There's some things we can do to set them up better for the future, but it's not going to be a real focus. It's definitely a different plan for every person, and there's elements that are, I do check blood work on everyone. I'll throw you that. Check out blood work on everyone. I send a scale and a blood pressure cuff to everybody. Outside of that, everyone gets health coaching, and the relationship is as deep with everyone. But
does everybody get an Oura ring
is
still?
Different. No, not everybody. Some people get stressed out about having a wearable. I totally respect that. There are people who wake up rested, but then their Oura ring tells them they didn't sleep well, and that's really cognitively dissonant and disturbing. The last thing we want to be doing is measuring things just for the sake of measuring them and potentially causing some emotional distress off of not hitting their target numbers. So I have folks who are incredibly quantified and quarterly labs, if not more frequently, and sleep trackers and exercise trackers and all kinds of data streaming into our system. And I have other folks who, what can we execute on that doesn't require me to track stuff? And that's fine. We meet folks where they are.
So the other thing I wanted to highlight is that secretly when I'm thinking about if you were to design this at scale for a population like we work with, let's say let's just arbitrarily say it's 5,000 employees. They're generally at plants, but some are remote. The first thing that stands out from this intake already is that they built the relationship before there was a problem. The second thing that stands out to me is my best doctor's visit happened remotely. I've never met Mike in person. No one on their team has ever touched me. That's mind-blowing that the best care I've received has been with Mike in Portland. And Trey, I believe he's in Kentucky.
He's in Lexington, yeah.
Lexington.
Everything goes back to relationships. Really, doctors. Yeah. Even how you could just look at sales, right?
Oh, yeah.
The sales you get are because of relationships. Or we get, everything is relationship based.
Yeah. I met one of the guys I take care of. Trey and I both met him in Ecuador on that same mountain climbing thing that you mentioned, Vlad. We were just on a call and we were like, you know what? Do you want to come? There was a bunch of guys going. And we were like, we think you'd really like this. And he was like, okay. Thought about it for a day. But that violates every traditional medicine practice sort of ethos, right? You're a doctor, you shouldn't be associating with your patients in a social capacity, right? And I agree with that in some ways. There are certainly boundary violations that can happen and issues that can come up. But I think it's so outdated and so antithetical to how I view what I do. Of course I want to go climb a mountain with my patients. It's good for their health. It lets us hang out together. Why would I not want to go do that? It's one thing to do that. It's another thing to use the opportunity at dinner to talk about all of their protected health information with a group of all of my other friends. That would be inappropriate and a boundary violation. But you can form deep relationship without meeting in person to the point where a year later you're going on vacation together, right? This is all on the table. It's just, I love that you called that out though, Vlad. It's I have the occasion to ultimately, I think I will spend physical time with everyone I take care of. I've met dozens of folks from Florida all the way to Washington, but after establishing a relationship, and there is an extra, it's like meeting an old friend when you actually get in person with them. So I look forward to spearfishing or doing something fun fun in LA with you sometime soon.
LA or Costa Rica.
That sounds even better.
Did I tell
have
you?
you not told them?
No, I haven't told them.
Oh.
I don't think I've told them. We're just like to this point about what is appropriate, thinking broadly about how to impact change. We're actually decided to throw a retreat in Costa Rica in 2026 for some clients, some other folks that you kind of have to apply to go. It's going to be 45 people. Whole airboat team is going to, and we're just taking over this resort in the Sara. And the whole point of this retreat is to really like build bridges between, there's this incredible group of humans that are making day-to-day decisions for so many people about their health and well-being. And I really believe that if we don't expose them to the kind of thinking that we've been exploring today, Mike, like really the stuff on the edges versus the stuff that's kind of like dated that I think they're exposed to on a more daily basis, then how are they supposed to come back and like really push the envelope with their populations and population health? And so the whole point of this retreat is to spend a week together doing yoga, climbing, for those that want to, trying surfing, just throwing it out there, and listening to really smart people that are sharing ideas about how to push the envelope. I hope we can persuade you to join us because I think it would be really fun to have you there.
I've only been to Costa Rica twice, and both times I legit did not want to leave. So it won't take much persuading to go down there. If these pesky teenagers weren't in high school in Oregon, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have come back about 2 years ago when we went down. And I think that is maybe a good place to land the plane too, is just this idea. This idea of community, right? If we don't, one of the things that's most lacking from our work, okay, I'll squeeze in some personal time, it's probably at the gym, this sort of like routine that we get locked into, we don't have sort of sacred spaces. I mean that secularly, right? It doesn't need to be religious, but sacred spaces and sacred moments. And that's truly like what the human community has been for millennia. Church attendance is going down, synagogue attendance is going down. People, we need this desperately, and we're getting less and less of it in our lives. So I love I'm probably in some capacity at 3 to 6 different retreats over the course of a calendar year. And I think that the retreat has become that sort of sacred space for people to turn the phones off, or at least turn them off for most of the day. It doesn't have to be a Vipassana, like silent meditation for 7 days. It can literally just be spending time together, having conversations, going outside, surfing, walking, hiking, doing yoga, eating good food, right? It just needs that actual sort of carve out of our routine. And then that's where so much magic happens with community and with innovative ideas and new projects all come out of these sort of retreat settings. So I love that you guys are doing something so massive in Costa Rica. That sounds amazing.
Thank you. Pumped to have you there. Deposit is down, so no backing out now. You know?
It's real. It's happening.
2026 works great for me because it's enough time that I'll probably be able to clear it on the calendar.
I love it. I love it.
You just gotta throw me dates next time we talk. We'll figure it out.
Done. We'll follow up. I want to let you go, and I want to just ask you one question because we've covered a lot. As someone who's dropping off this podcast, listening to our conversation, if there was just like one idea you could seed into their mind to really like explore in their own space once they've turned off our voices and you want to leave them with, is there one thing that comes to mind that you can kind of simplify that you think would like help propagate a state change?
Yeah, I bring this up early when I give talks to groups, and it's I think you can get as deep into this as you want. What does true health mean to you? That's what I would give people to chew on, because I think in our society it means not being sick, and I think it's so much richer and more complicated than that. But it is also highly individualized. So that's what I would have people chew on afterwards.
Mike Stone, founder of Nexus Medicine, my doctor, maybe soon to be Kate's doctor.
I know. I'm like on the side, like, okay, how am I gonna?
We really appreciate your time today. Thank you for taking it, and talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you guys. So much fun.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.